Most English students dream of speaking fluently and understanding native speakers. They watch a lot of videos, read books, listen to podcasts, and go to language exchanges to practice speaking. Despite all that, they still don't feel like they're making enough progress. One reason is likely that they tend to ignore writing. Students tend to think, well, my goal is to speak fluently, so writing is just a waste of time. What people don't realize is that writing and speaking are connected. Both require the creation of language, whereas listening and reading simply consume it. Writing is one of the most useful ways to improve your ability to speak, because unlike speaking, you have all the time in the world to think about what you want to say, to review what you said, and to correct mistakes. When you're having a conversation, you don't have time for any of that. Speaking is like giving a concert. Writing is like practicing your instrument. If you want to speak more fluently, spend more time writing. Let me show you how to take full advantage of writing in just a short period of time. Your first thought might be, I hate writing. Your second thought might be, I don't know what to write about. The good news, you don't have to write a novel, you only need to try to write around 100 words. That's less than 1/3 of a page. Don't know what to write about? No worries, simply go online and look up conversation starters, and I'm sure you'll find a bunch of websites with hundreds of questions that you can use as inspiration. Let's say, for example, that I decided to write about one of my favorite memories. Maybe my story looks like this. I will always remember the evening spent with my mom and some friends when she spoke English with real American. She feels so proud when she talks about those moments, and that means so much happiness for me. It's important that you write your story in an application like Word, Google Docs, or any other word processor with spell check. This will ensure that when you ask native speakers for feedback, you get interesting comments, not just spelling corrections. At any rate, the hardest part is done. Now, let's try to learn as much as possible. The first thing you'll want to do is translate your story back to your native language. Instead of translating literally, word for word, write it such that it sounds as natural as possible in your native language. Next, it's time for our first round of feedback, automated feedback. By automated, I mean heading over to your favorite online translator to copy and paste your native language version of the story. My favorite online translator is DeepL. In my opinion, it gives very accurate and natural sounding translations compared to other online translators. All you need to do is paste your native language story on the left, and you'll see the English translation on the right. What's really nice is that you can actually make modifications to the translation. Simply click on any word in the translation to see some alternatives. In this case, we see how the first translation used the word night, but evening is an acceptable alternative, which is what we used when we wrote our first draft. Now it's time to compare the online translator's version with our original and make some improvements. These can be corrections to any mistakes you made or simply some new expressions that you're not used to using. For example, even though I will always remember is perfectly fine, maybe you want to start using I will never forget a little more often. Something else we might want to correct is the evening spent with my mom and some friends. It sounds much more natural to say the evening when my mom and I met some friends, or the evening my mom and I spent with some friends, because my mom and I is the subject of the sentence, which should go before the verb met or spent. We also forgot the A when we said she spoke English with real American, which of course we need in order to indicate that we're talking about one non-specific person. Finally, instead of that means so much happiness for me, we should say it makes me feel happy, which is a much more natural and direct way to express this idea. Our story's already sounding a lot better, but you don't want to sound like a robot, you want to sound like a native English speaker. To make sure that we don't sound like an online translator, it's time for the most important step, getting feedback from a native. You might think that finding a native speaker to talk with is difficult and that asking them to review stories for you all the time is going to be annoying. Well, you're in luck because there's a free online tool that was built for this exact type of thing. Even if you're friends with a native English speaker, a tool like Hi Native is still extremely helpful. Instead of always asking the same person to proofread your stories, with Hi Native you can simply post them and anybody in their community can respond if they're interested. Once you sign up for a free account, you can go to the Ask button and select the Ask Something Else option. Next, simply select the language you want feedback in, English of course, and write, "Can you help me make this story sound more natural?" in the question box. You can then copy and paste your corrected story in the additional information box, and finally click Ask. Now, simply wait, and typically within about an hour or two, you'll have at least 1 or 2 responses. Here are 3 that I got when I posted our original story. The first one just said that I should say, "I will never forget that evening," instead of "I will never forget the evening," and that I missed a few commas. The second gave me some advice about a real American. They think we should just say "an American," since to them it sounds more natural. Finally, the third person said instead of saying she feels so proud when she talks about those moments, to say she is extremely proud when she talks about this moment. They also suggest that we say "it makes me happy" instead of "it makes me feel happy." Of course, if you want, you can respond and ask them some follow-up questions if something isn't clear. By the way, you'll notice that sometimes natives don't always agree. This is okay. There are many ways to express the same idea, and the goal of this exercise is not to learn perfect grammar and punctuation from strangers. Instead, focus on comments like, "This sounds more natural," such as the recommendation to change "a real American" to "an American." If you are in a situation like the one where one native suggests "I will never forget that evening," but others left your original text alone, "I will never forget the evening," then chances are what you originally wrote is fine. Perhaps it's a regional difference or some small nuance. There might also be some suggestions that you simply don't like. Perhaps you know that "extremely" is a much more powerful word than "so," and you really don't want to add that much emphasis. You're in control. You get to pick the options that best tell your story. Now it's time to make sure that we remember all this feedback. First, update your story with the corrections that you want to make based on the feedback you got. Here, I'm going to use the suggestion to say "an American" instead of "a real American," because I agree it sounds much more natural. I'm going to say "this moment" instead of "those moments," since I'm only talking about one moment. And "it makes me happy" because I also like how it's just a shorter way to express the idea. It's really important to then write down any corrections or suggestions you received that are particularly interesting to you. This should be in something that you review regularly, like a notebook, flashcards, or apps like Anki. For example, I can take the suggestion about "it makes me happy," go into Anki, and add a new electronic flashcard, where on one side I put the translation in my native language, and on the other, the answer in English. Now, just review your notes every once in a while, and try to use these corrections in your conversations so that you internalize them. And there you have it. 5 steps to speak more fluent and natural English through writing. Write your first draft, translate it to your native language, compare it to an online translator to fix mistakes, get feedback from a native, and then review the suggestions. When I first started to learn Spanish, I spent a lot of time playing with applications, watching videos, and studying flashcards, but I found that it was still very difficult to put together complete sentences in a real conversation. It wasn't until I started to incorporate deliberate writing into my practice routine that I finally started to feel more fluent and confident that what I was saying sounded natural. I'm sure that if you incorporate some deliberate writing in your practice routine, that you'll start to see the same transformation. If you like this video and want more, be sure to click subscribe and head over to deliberatenglish.com to learn more about how to speak fluent English and understand native speakers. See you soon.